You guys think I've gone crazy because of the quarantine, but this is just how I am. So, we move on to week 2 of History 105 quarantine, and here we are. So, we've got everything we need, like we did last week, hopefully. I haven't received any questions from you guys, so either that means I'm the greatest YouTuber on the planet, greatest professor on the planet, or it means none of you watched it. I don't know. I saw some views on there, so I'm hoping that some of you wrote down your stuff. Because remember, the notes that I posted up there and that I sent you guys, those are guiding notes, okay? But you need to watch the videos in order to get the gist, the total information that will be on the final exam, okay? So if you have not watched them, you should, because you're gonna need that information, okay? Don't just rely on the little guiding notes that I sent you via Canvas, okay? Also, really quick, some people have contacted me and said, the schedule is all messed up now. Do not rely on the schedule in Canvas, okay? I put that up there quickly just because, well, they expect us to do it. But focus on the syllabus that is in files, okay? The one that's always been there, the one that you first looked at when you first got into class. That has not changed, folks. The dates, everything else is still the same. The only thing has changed is the method that I'm giving you the information, which is through video now, since we can't meet. Things are gonna go better this week. I'm gonna put this into 2 videos, okay? 2 videos at about an hour apiece, okay? So once again, it's gonna be a little bit less than the normal time that you spend in class, because the videos that I would be normally showing you, I'm gonna be showing you in the emails. I'm gonna send them to you via the emails, not just my videos, this video, these videos, but the other videos that I would show you in class. Those are gonna be uploaded as well, just like the last ones were, okay? So about 1 hour for this one, and then 1 hour for the next one, and we're gonna move on, okay? All right, so first things first, our guiding question is, how is Europe slowly starting to show the beginning of an individual identity, or the beginnings of individual identities, okay? Transitioning from the early Middle Ages to the High Middle Ages. So remember, last week we talked about you can split up the Middle Ages, right? These things called the Middle Ages, into 3 different sections, all right? So you have the early Middle Ages, after the fall of the Western Empire, leading up to the year 1000, okay? Nice even number, 1000. And then we have the High Middle Ages, right? 1000 to the late 1300s, well, mid 1300s. And then from the 1300s on to that question mark, 1500? I don't know, because we're gonna have to talk about that. Why is it that some people say it ended in the 1500 or 1500? Could it be before, could it be after? Because remember, with events, with ages, there's no like single time when everybody just turned around, looked at each other and said, "Oh, we're in a new time period. So now we have to, now this is this time period." No, nobody did that. The lives of men and women just go on as they always did, and the changes are imperceptible. You don't realize that you're moving into what used to be the future, and now it's the present. So that's how it is that's how it was for them as well too. But our main idea here is, how is Europe slowly starting to show the beginnings of individual identities? Okay, what we mean by this is how we know them. Are people starting to realize that they are separate from the others, and they are in this time period that we're talking about. On most maps, by the High Middle Ages, we're starting to, and then this is going to be seen in the late Middle Ages, starting to see the word Europe, right? Europa. That there are, these are Europeans, and they are different from Africans or Asians or wherever the people are that they start meeting as they move on from the Middle Ages into the Renaissance, okay? But we're going to start seeing examples of how these people, remember, they were tribes, right? They were tribes that were under control of the Romans. The Romans are long gone, and now they're starting to form their identities. And we're going to see how they do it, okay? So first things first, we need to talk about the Turnitin question. So the Turnitin question was for you to name at least one reason why the Do-Nothing Kings in Francia in the Frankish kingdom. Well, why were they called the do-nothing kings? Why was that kingdom weak at the beginning? Okay. Now remember, hopefully you got that right on the quiz. The Carolingians are not the ones who start the Frankish kingdom, right? They are the power behind the throne, but the family, the group of Franks, right? That tribal confederation that ended up there in the last parts of the dying Western Roman Empire. They are the Merovingians, right? They stem from a guy named Merovich, and he's mostly a mythical figure, and they are the kings at that time. Okay, kings of really not much. Okay, there's a Frankish kingdom, but the power of the Merovingians only extends as far as, well, their armies, their specific armies and their household and their lands dominate. After that, you get people that kind of give them a little bit of lip service, like, yeah, you're the king. But for the most part, they do their own thing. But now we talked about how the Carolingians, this other powerful Frankish family, they grow up and they, using the same tactics that the Merovingians do, they get to be the power behind the throne, right? The mayor of the palace, or majordomo. And slowly they just take over until finally in the mid 700s, they finally just do take over. We have a guy named Charles Martel, right? And he's called the Hammer of the Muslims. And he is the one who is the true legitimate power in the Frankish kingdom. There is the Merovingian king, and but nobody listens to him because everybody knows who actually controls everything. So if we think about those reasons why the first Frankish kingdom was weak, there's 4 different reasons. Okay, and many of you even wrote down a couple. But number 1 was that the idea was that you gave whatever inheritance you had, you split it up between your sons. So if you were a Merovingian lord, you didn't just give it to one son, you gave it to, well, if you had 8 sons, well, guess what? 8 different sons now got a piece of the pie. Now, why is that? Well, it's fair, I guess, because, they all have your blood running through their veins, but it's not very politically savvy, because now, instead of having one large system of control, underneath one man, you now have split it up. You've chopped it up into 8 different parts, or 4 different parts, how many sons you have. Most of it, none of it goes to women, okay? None of it goes to women, so if you have daughters, that's great. Your daughter's gonna get married to other powerful lords. And we talked about that, how the Merovingians rose to power. But when you die, and if you have sons, it's going to get chopped up. Your inheritance, your land, everything, your gold, your wealth, everything's going to get chopped up between those sons. Okay, so that makes whatever they get weaker than what you had. Okay, number 2, we talked about this. They continue the idea of gift giving, right? Gift giving. So be my buddy, be my ally, my partner in crime, and I will give you lands, I will give you titles, I will give you gold. Well, you can only do that for so long before things start falling apart, because you run out of land, you run out of gold. The only thing you really don't run out of is titles, and the titles become meaningless, though. The titles become worthless. I mean, it's nice to have them, to be the Duke of something or the Lord of whatever, but if no money or if no land is coming with that, then okay, great. Yeah, it's nice to, be known as something, but okay. Number 3, and we're going to be talking about this a little bit later on in the talk too, is up in northern Europe, especially in the area that we know as France now, there is a distinct lack of urban/cultural centers. Okay, remember, the Roman Empire was spread across all of Europe. But where were the big cities? The big cities, for the most part, were along the Mediterranean, right? Rome, obviously, but then you had those old Greek cities, like in the south of France. You had the Spanish cities, and that's kind of how it still keeps going on. Now, the vast majority of Europeans at this time are living rural lives, right? They're living out in small villages or small farms. they're not living in these cities. So these grand cities of the Roman times, that's long gone. And it's even compounded up in the north, in Northern Europe. There's just no urban centers really there, okay? So like we think about Paris, this grand capital, the city of lights. Paris is a little backwater. There's nothing there. There's barely anything there. There's a little city wall around it, but for the most part, the Frankish kings don't even live there. They don't, Paris is nothing, okay? It's not the grand capital of the Frankish kingdom or anything like that. London, same thing. It's just a little backwater. There's no real urban centers where, tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people call home in the north. Just not happening. And so why is that a detriment to these Frankish kings? Well, these do-nothing kings. It's a detriment because with these urban centers, you have what? Trade, right? Trade is and will be still continue to be the lifeblood of empires and kingdoms. You have to have trade. You have to have stuff getting sold, and you have to have stuff coming in. And because there's a vibrancy there. And what does it create? It creates money. Somebody wants something. You don't have anything they want, but you do have one thing, and that's gold. That's money. Okay, and we're going to see how that slowly transforms. And in the north, they just don't have that. There's just not those grand commercial centers, and so you just don't. You have a real stagnation. And it's hard to administer these places because everybody's so spread thin, right? There's no major places where you could stick like your men and say, do this and give me taxes. Everybody's spread across this huge, Frankish empire there that comprises a lot of different countries, modern countries. And there's just no way to gather them all together or give them your rule, your orders, and especially no way of really taxing them. And there's just no economic viability going on, okay? And then number four, the last reason why the Frankish kingdom was weak at the beginning, and it took the Carolingians time to make this better, was that you had a set of, what they call the do-nothing kings, these Merovingians. They did nothing. They just relied on doing the same thing that their dads and their grandfathers and great-grandfathers have been doing for generations at that point. Leading up to the 9th and 10th century. They just give away stuff, right? Be my friend, be my ally. Here's land, here's gold, here's titles. And so they become the do-nothing kings. And the Carolingians, they step into that vacuum, okay? They step into that vacuum. Oops. Okay, so we take a look at the map. Around the year 700, between 700 and 800, this is what it looks like, and this is what it's going to look like after the year 800, leading up to the year 900 as well too. You're slowly starting to see these kingdoms evolve. Okay, you're slowly starting to see these kingdoms evolve. So remember, in Spain, we still have the Islamic inheritance. We still have the Islamic presence here, and that's going to be there for a long time. Here in Western Europe, we see the Frankish kingdom, and it's split in a couple parts. Up here, there's no such thing as England. We have all these different little kingdoms up there, but England will come around. The word itself, England, starts forming in the mind of one of the very first kings and up there, and his name was Alfred the Great. And it comes from the old word of the people who originally settled there, the Angles and the Saxons. And these were people that had taken off from these areas and they had made it over there. And those are the people that that landed there after the Romans were gone, So they basically took that name, the Angles, it's spelled just like it is, A-N-G-L-E-S. And over time, the English language starts to develop. And it's taken pieces of German and everything else, and French starts to develop, and so we get the beginning of a new kingdom, England, which comes from these Angles names. So Angle, or like the land of the Angles, Angleland, Anglalanda, or England, or England as it starts to come. Okay, and that's what we see with that. Okay, so this is what it kind of looks like. And moving on. Okay, let's take a look, see where we are here. All right, folks. I don't want you, once again, I'm going to keep hammering on this because I don't want you to get ahead of yourself. There is no idea There was no concept, and we're talking about the years, 700s or 800s or 900s, of countries or anything like that. Okay, nobody is talking about countries. Okay, we have to first get to kingdoms first. Okay, we have to talk about kingdoms. That there are a multitude of small kings that rise up, or petty kings as they're called, and then eventually they'll be eaten up. And then these larger kingdoms will start to form. But that takes time, right? It's not like all of a sudden, 50 years, there's a new kingdom and it's gobbled up everything for the most part. You have the rise of these kingdoms. They have to consolidate. They have to take over their neighbors and everything else. And they slowly start to form this understanding of who they are. These kingdoms, okay? A place that's led by a king. But in the very beginning, the 700s, the 800s, and 900s, kings are weak. They're very, very weak. We're going to talk about that, okay? Very, very weak. The lords and things like that are the ones that are in charge, okay? Also, in this time, Christianity has been around now as a thing, for almost 1,000 years. This is crazy. By the year 1000, or by the year even 700, 800, Christ he's been gone for a long time. He's been gone for 8 centuries. But Christianity itself has been recognized is the religion since the 300s under Constantine, under the Roman Empire. And but by the year 700, 800, Christianity is still not universal. It is still not universal, crazily enough. Obviously down here, they're not practicing Christians. This is all Islamic, all Islamic, all Islamic. In the East, right, they are Christian, but as we talked about last week, there's a schism in the year 1054. So these people are not obeying the papacy here, right, led by the Pope. They are not obeying the Pope's orders. They are Christian, absolutely so, but they are a Greek Orthodox Christian, okay, with their capital here in good old Constantinople. But even these areas, and up here, right, and up here as well, these people are not necessarily, a lot of them are not necessarily Christian either, or they're Christian to only a certain degree. You have right here still a lot of old pagan tribes running around. And so Christianity is not universal. It's going to be a slow process of time for the Catholic Church, because that's what we're talking about now, to slowly spread its message through missionary work, through proselytization, right? Holy men, monks and priests and stuff going out to these places and teaching these pagans about the light of Christ and everything else, but then also through the sword. And we talked about that last week too, that Islam, the other major religion at the time, is a religion spread by the sword. It is spread through conquest, through paying tribute. And Christianity, to a large degree, will do the same thing in these places that still have not been Christianized, or have not received Christianity, okay? All right, so moving on, remember we talked a little bit last week, the Romans at this point, they're forgotten, okay? If you're a regular peasant, you're a regular nobody, working on your fields in the middle of wherever here, right? At Aquitania. The Romans, remember the idea is that they're all around you. You know that there's great people was there, but you have no idea who they are. You can see some aqueducts, you can see some old ruins. You walk along the roads that may still be there that they built, but the Romans are gone, and the only people that still remember them or have any idea about how great they were, or that this knowledge had been lost, is the nobles, the people at the top, and we're going to talk about them, and the church. And what do these two people have in common? Well, not even really have in common, but to a certain degree, they have education. They have some kind of literacy. But if you're just a regular person, a peasant, just a farmer, a fisherman, whatever, these people are way out of touch with what you know of your history. You don't know history. You don't know much. Okay, but what was this time period like, folks? Well, it was a mixture of the nobility and the peasantry, but it was also a time, and we talked about this as well a little bit last week, of violence. Okay, violence. society is run upon its laws. You take away laws out of any society, even now in the year 2020, you take away laws. If you take away the ability to enforce those laws, or you have no laws at all, but more importantly, if there's no centralized structure that gives the laws, maintains the laws, and enforces the laws, structure breaks down, and so no progress can occur, or very little, or very slowly can it occur in a society, and that's unfortunately what much of Europe was in the early to high Middle Ages. It was a very, very, very brutal time to be, especially a peasant. If you were a peasant, you couldn't run down to your local Walmart and buy, some kind of weapon to defend yourself. You might have a rudimentary knife that was made for you. It's not very good. You certainly don't have an actual weapon like a sword. You might have a bow and arrow, but you only have, a couple arrows. It's not easy to make new ones. But for the everyday average peasant, person at the very bottom of the pile there, this was a very tough time. We talked a little bit about that last week. A very brutal time, a time of people running roughshod over you, because, like I said, if a local warlord came running through your village with his men, you can't fight them because they're professional soldiers. They're trained. They're professional warriors, I should say, not soldiers. They're not in some army or anything like that. But they are professional warriors. They have horses usually. They have armor. They have weapons. And you can't fight against that. The only thing you do is maybe run to a church or just run away, hide if they come. But if they do, if they do come through and they roll through and they do a bunch of terrible things, depredations against the people, there's no real counter to that. There's nobody you can complain to. You can't run off to the local sheriff or the local anything like that. The local lord might be many miles away. But even if you did, even if there was a local lord there, that local lord might only have so many men under his command, and land is big, and so he might get together enough men to go out looking for these people, but for the most part, life was very short, and it was very brutal. It was very difficult, and that's how it went. Okay. Also, whoops. Go back to our map. This point, turning from the early Middle Ages to the High Middle Ages, is a time of new invasions. Okay, new invasions from the north. Okay, we're going to talk about that. New invasions from the east. We're going to talk a little bit about that, and then invasions from the south as well. So if you're right here, this is ground zero. This is the target. You've got a giant target on your back because they're coming to you to take. They're not coming to be friends and work together to resolve their differences. They're coming to take from you. They want what you have, as little as it is, because that is, that's how a lot of their cultures are based off of, these people that are going to be invading, and we're going to get to each one of those individually, okay? All right, so, the church. Now, even though, we just talked about how the church is not throughout every society. There are still many pagans and things like that at this time, people that are worshiping the old gods, stuff like that. The church, though, in the places that it is there, is ubiquitous. It is found throughout society in some degree or another, okay? We're going to be talking about this with the little people in a little bit as well. But the Pope in Rome, is the chief authority. The Pope in Rome is, remember, he was one of the five great patriarchs, and now he's the Pope, or the Father. He is the head of the Holy Mother Church. He is the head of the Roman Catholic Church, and that is what everybody is a part of in Western Europe, and to a large degree in Central Europe and Southern Europe as well. The church controls all facets of your life, and that correlates with this idea that that society is very violent, because the church is offering you what? What is the church offering you? The church is offering you, and you can only get it through the church if you buy into the church, salvation. Okay, so your life is miserable. You're just a peasant. This is all you've ever known. This is the same thing your father did and your grandfather, and all the way back to wherever. Your life is short. Your life is brutal. It could end at any moment. The church is offering you a chance for salvation. The church is offering you a chance for eternal life after you die, and but it's only through them. Okay, the church is telling you that yes, this life is not very good, but you still need to maintain a good life. You still need to do the things that you need to do, which are important. Because if you remain being a good person, if you do the good things, and if you are contrite about the bad things that you do, then in the end, Christ will come back, because it says so in the Bible, that Christ will come back, and that Christ will, bring those that followed him, that served him, that believed him, and you'll be part of his army when he fights the final battle against the forces of evil, the forces of the devil. And when he comes back, you're going to be there with him. And then, once it's all done and he's won, you're going to be gone. You're going to be in heaven, the kingdom of heaven. You're going to sit at the right hand of God, and everything's going to be much, much better, where there's no pain, there's no suffering, anything like that. Okay. But if you turn your back on the church, not just as if you're a bad guy, but if you turn your back on the church, okay, if you're not buying into what the church is telling you, then hell awaits, eternal damnation, torment awaits. Okay, so this was very real to these people, very important to these people. They tried to maintain as much of a adherence to church teachings as they could. But people were people, so people do good things and bad things. That's how it goes. Okay, but the idea was that eventually, now it's not like these peasants are sitting there, marking days off their calendar. Okay, they did not have any concept of if you're a peasant of the days of the week, anything like that. You just kind of knew. Okay, usually based on the seasons. You just kind of knew what time it was. Oh, it's fall, it's getting time for planting. Oh, it's spring, everything's coming back, or it's harvest time, whatever it might be. You just kind of knew it. But it was taught by many, especially in the church, that once we got to this certain year, the year 1000, because it was going to be the first time that the chronological date went to a four number, year. Because it had been three digits for forever, even through the Romans, that this was going to be the end of days. This was going to be the end of time. That Christ was going to come back, and this was going to be the final battle. And we still see that in a modern society as well. People get kind of weird when we get to like certain epoch years, right? Especially, we love those like even ones. So like the year 2000, everybody freaked out when the year 2000 happened. I don't know how many of you are, maybe you're born in the year 2000, but everybody thought everything was going to fall apart. All the normal kooks came out of the woodwork, and they were saying, oh, the computers were going to stop, the banks were going to fail, everything's going to be done. That's going to be the end of it. We're still here. Now, I don't know, my goodness, this whole thing's going on. So once again, people are, getting a little weirded out whenever you have these events. Same thing was happening, 1,000 years ago. The idea is that, whenever there's a change, in that date, a change of time period, a change of culture, change of thinking, change of whatever it might be, that, people always seem to sense that this is it. This is going to be the final culmination of it. Okay. All right. So we wrapped up really quickly talking about this guy. Not much about him though. Remember, this is Charlemagne, Charles the Great. Okay. The name Charlemagne comes from Latin for Charles Magnus, Magnus. Charlemagne. So Charles the Great. Charlemagne was the grandson of Charles Martel, the guy we talked about. His father's name was Pepin, Pepin, and Charles the Great is the first emperor of this new reconstituted Holy Roman Empire. So now it's not just the Roman Empire anymore, it's now the Holy Roman Empire. And that's very important distinction because even though the Romans towards the end there had switched over underneath Constantine to allowing Christianity, and it eventually became just pretty much the state religion. This is the church's way of saying, yes, you are the new emperor in the West, but you are doing this under the guise of a religion, of Christianity, unlike what the Roman emperors were doing even towards the end. And so this is not just the Roman Empire, this is now the Holy Roman Empire, or HRE, okay? Now remember, if you're the Romans in the East or the Byzantines, you're looking at this new guy in the year 800 and you'd be like, no, I don't care what this Pope in Rome says. We're the continuation of the Roman Empire. We never ended. We just kept going. And so there's going to be, fight, that distrust and that mistrust between the two sides, between East and West Europe. It's going to end up biting these Europeans in the butt, especially when they have to tackle the Muslims later on. But talking about him really quickly, Charles the Great, or Charlemagne, remember he's crowned the Holy Roman Empire, he's crowned the Holy Roman Emperor on Christmas Day of the year 800. And so he starts his new, Carolingian Empire, his new Holy Roman Empire, and it encompasses the largest empire we see in the West since the time of the Roman Empire. And it takes a lot of time. And so Charlemagne, he's, and like we've talked about this, you need a dynamic character to control the powerful stuff that's going on like this. You need a very powerful character. I'm going to pause that really quick just to make sure everything's going okay with the camera. Yeah, everything's going great. Okay, so you need dynamic characters. So I'm going to give you a list of these qualities of Charlemagne which made him a very dynamic character. Okay, number one, ever since the Roman times, people were we equate size, height with power. But the Romans were very small people, so it's weird to think like Julius Caesar, this guy that we've been talking about for 2,000 years. He according to the records, he was a short guy compared to as we think about height. Charlemagne was different though. Charlemagne, he was based on the reports, and all the reports say this. So we have and this goes back to the Dark Ages discussion from last week. We have a reasonable assumption that this was correct, that he was pushing 6 plus, between 6'2" and 6'4". So he was a very large man, and that's large even for now. So he was a dominating personality, okay, a very dominating personality. A couple other things about him. He developed a cult of personality around him, okay, so he was the emperor. He was the first Holy Roman emperor. So he developed this cult of personality just like Augustus did, 800 years previous. This idea that through me is power, without me, there's not this thing. So cult of personality, he was a military leader. The man was always in the saddle, fighting against the enemies of the Holy Roman Empire and the enemies of Christianity. He was a military leader. He wasn't a guy that was just sitting at home, scribbling down notes. He was in the saddle all the time. He was on campaign for months at a time during the spring and summer months. Then he would be back in his capital of Aachen, which is in Germany now, during the winter months, during the lull and fighting. But he was a very vivacious, live life to the fullest type of guy. Even though he was a Christian, and he professed, what these Christian leaders are telling him, what the Pope is telling him. He was a man first, and so he was a womanizer. He was an inveterate womanizer as well. He had an empress, but he had girlfriends all over the place, and because of that, he had numerous illegitimate children all over the place as well, both sons and daughters all over wherever he went. Okay, he loved life. He loved, according to the records, he loved a challenge. He liked the challenges. he was in a fight from the very beginning with the supremacy of who was supreme, who was at the top. Was it him, the emperor, or was it the pope? Even at his coronation in the year 800, who is it that actually crowns him? He does not crown himself. It is the pope who places the crown on his head, and there's reports that he's upset by that even then, because it's basically saying, yes, I'm in charge, but there's somebody who's also in charge of me too. And it's not just God, it is the church fathers as well. And so we see 1,000 years later, like when Napoleon crowns himself Emperor of the French, he does not have the church father do it, he does not have the Pope do it. He takes the crown from the Pope and sticks it on his own head, and he sticks it on the head of his Empress Josephine as well. And that's very symbolic. He knew what he was doing. Okay? Charlemagne, like I said, he's a military leader, and so he pushes out further and further to the south. He's fighting against the Muslims down here in Spain, and including the pagan Bascos over here across the Pyrenees. He's fighting against anyone that he believes is not Christian, but anyone who is, a challenge for his empire as well. So, for instance, up here in what is modern-day Germany, he's fighting against Saxon tribes. He's fighting against tribes that have been there now for hundreds of years, and they're still not Christian. They're still believing in their old gods, the old pagan gods. At one point, he captures like 4,000 of them in a big pitched battle, and he has his men go around and tell them, look, you've got two choices. You can either convert to Christianity and join with us, or I can have you killed. Well, many of them did not. They said, no, we don't believe in Christianity. We believe in our old gods, and we're not going to turn our backs on them now. And so he has a bunch of them killed, thousands of them killed. He's a tough leader. But many of the sources, show that this is, that he truly believed in, what he was doing, spreading Christianity through the sword as well. He controls people through gifts and through military exercises, just like his forefathers have done, the Carolingians, and first the Merovingians, then the Carolingians. He's giving people gifts. This empire becomes so large that he can't control it all by himself. We found this out, how this led to problems with the Romans. And so he creates a new piece of the nobility. He separates a lot of these areas into smaller areas into what are called counties. Okay, counties. And he creates a new administrative post, a new title of nobility called a count, C-O-U-N-T. And the count is in charge of his county. Okay, and then and there's always a chain of command. So the count, so the local people in the county, they give their problems to the count. The count takes all those problems and gives them to the person above him in a larger area, the duke, and then the duke, gives those problems up to the emperor, to the king, to Charlemagne. Okay, so that is another thing that Charlemagne comes up with. He's always on campaign as well. I think I have a picture of it. No, I don't. On the other one, I do. But another thing that he does is he realizes that in order for this not to just become another, sorry, hold on, my mind went blank, just kind of ramshackle thing that's going to fall apart, he realizes that the higher ups, the people that are in charge of his kingdom, his bureaucracy, they need to be able to read and write. That is now a requirement. You have to be able to read and write. For practical reasons, if I'm on campaign with you and I send out, on a piece of paper or vellum or whatever it might be, a message to bring your armies up here, and you can't read, what good is it? I can have a writer write and tell you that, but what if he gets captured or his horse falls off a cliff or something else, and it doesn't get to you? You have to be able to read, okay? So what he does is he wants the people higher in his society to understand that and be literate. And so remember, who are the only people in society that know that type of stuff? And that is the church, okay? That is the church. The church fathers speak both Latin and the vernacular. They speak the local language, whatever it might be, primitive French or primitive German or primitive English, whatever it might be, okay? But Charlemagne creates these things called scriptoriums, okay, scriptoriums. He staffs them not only with church people, but with other bureaucrats that know how to read and write. And they're sitting in there in the scriptorium, okay? And as you can see the word script, right, to write, script. This is basically a center of learning. It's a center, it's like not a library per se, you don't go and check out books, but it's a place where all the scrolls of information are kept, old things, old pieces of knowledge from the Romans, the Greeks, whatever it might be, what has ever made it there. It's also where financial records and marriage certificates and all this other stuff that we just take for granted in our society is kept as well. It's a place where, people are sent, and usually they're people who are going to be put into the church or are already part of the church, and they are reading and writing. They are learning this stuff. His nobles are reading and writing to a certain degree. He can only force them as much as he says, but basically it's like, well, learn how to do this or you won't progress, okay? Now, is this happening for the regular people, for the 99% of the people in Europe at this time? Absolutely not, okay? People are not going to scriptoriums, they're not going to school, they are not learning to read or write anything. They are completely illiterate society. They are totally ignorant of history, of philosophy, of anything like that. Spelling, they don't know any of that stuff, okay? All they know is what they do. They get up, they do it, they go to bed, they get up, they do the same thing. That's what they do for year after year until they die. And they teach their children how to do it as well too, okay? So scriptoriums, he creates many of these as well, okay? Interestingly enough is underneath Charlemagne, as you can see, his empire, right? It stretched across many different places in Europe. So it was actually very multicultural, okay? The people living down here are obviously a lot different than the people living up here in his capital of Aachen. But like we talked about, the north is still very underdeveloped. It's still very there's not that many urban areas like we talked about. The majority of his trade and the money and everything else is situated down here in the south, okay? Because it's on the Mediterranean. We're going to talk about that, okay? All right, so moving on really quickly. We get to, so Charlemagne expands the empire. He's this great dynamic leader. And that's always kind of been a theme in our class, that you have a great dynamic leader, and then the son takes over, and we see the beginnings of, how the things start falling apart. Now, not necessarily does that happen here, but to a certain degree it does. This guy is the son of Charlemagne. What do we got? I really like this time period because everybody starts having nicknames, okay? So Charlemagne, he had numerous illegitimate children, right, all over the place. But he only had one legitimate child, okay, the heir to the empire, and that was this guy. His name was Louis, okay, Louis. And he was called the Pious. He was called the Pious because if you look here, here's an old drawing of him, all right, from a medieval script. He's holding in his left hand, he's holding a shield, okay, like, hey, I'm in charge, right? We've talked about the idea of raising the emperor up on the shield. But in his right hand, is he holding a mace or a sword? No, he's holding what? He's holding a cross, because Louis was extremely pious. The records tell us that Louis, Charlemagne's son, was very devoted to the church. He was a friend of the Pope. At the time, he was a friend of the church, and his main mission in life was to maintain this empire after Charlemagne leaves it to him, and spread the faith, spread the word of God. Well, he was successful in one of those things because, poor Louis, he was everything that Charlemagne was not. I'm not saying that Charlemagne was just some dumb blockhead running around killing everything. He wasn't. He was educated. but he was a military leader. Well, Louis wasn't. Louis was not a military leader. He was not a general that you could find on horseback all the time. He was a man who appreciated his letters. He was a man who appreciated education, and he was a man who appreciated the church. And so, what big, huge mistake did Louis make? Well, the big mistake that he made was he remained faithful to his wife. Okay, so unlike Charlemagne, unlike his dad running around sleeping with everything he could, Louis the Pious remained faithful to his first wife, and then he remained faithful to his second wife. He did not have girlfriends, he did not have mistresses, anything like that. Well, why is that a problem? Well, that's a major problem because, let me give you their names. Yeah. Okay. Okay. What Louis did, which, I mean, he was a faithful guy, he remained faithful to his first wife until she passed away. Before she passed away, she gave him 3 children, 3 sons, okay? And that's what you want, obviously. She gave him Pepin, P-E-P-I-N, so named after his great-grandfather. Named after his grandfather. Pepin of Aquitaine, okay? And Aquitaine is a very important place that is located down here in southern France. Okay, Aquitaine, we're going to be talking about that a little bit later. You have the second son, who is Lothair of Burgundy, and Burgundy is an area right here, okay? And then you have the third son, Louis the German, okay? And he's called the German because, well, this is where he hung out, okay, in the eastern portion of the empire, okay? But then his wife dies, and he's in mourning for many, many years, but then eventually he does what all men did at this time, like we talked about last week. What did he do? He got remarried, okay? If you're still virile and you still have the ability to have children, you do. So he got remarried to his second empress, and what did she do? Well, she gave him a son, and he stayed faithful to her as well. And the son, his name was Charles the Bald. Now, the bald part, we don't really know, because some sources say he was bald, called the Bald because he literally was bald as we think of it. Other sources say that it was kind of a nickname, that he was extremely hairy, right? So like, you have Little John, who was not very little. Charles the Bald was not very bald. He was actually very hairy. I don't know what the truth of the matter was. But so you have these 3 full brothers, and then you have their half-brother, Charles the Bald. Well, why is this a problem? Well, because what did these Carolingians do, right? When you have multiple children, what do you have to do? You have to split up their inheritance. Charlemagne didn't have to do that. He just had Louis the Pious. So when Charlemagne died, Louis the Pious got everything, because that was the only legitimate son that he had. But Louis, by being faithful to his wives, had 4, count them, 4 legitimate children. And so they all want a piece of the pie. Okay, now we talked about this. That is going to make the empire weak, but he does it. He tries to bring in the idea, and we talked about this before, a primogeniture, right? Primogeniture, okay, comes from the Latin primus, right? First, or genitus, birth. So first birth. He tries to basically just give everything to Pepin, Aquitaine. Pepin dies, so he's like, okay, I'll give it to Lothair. Well, how do these other guys think about it? Well, they're understandably pissed off. They're upset. It's like, no, this is not how we've ever done it in our family's history for hundreds of years. We all want a piece of it. So what do? Well, poor Louis, he ends up spending the last 20 or so years of his reign fighting in a civil war against, not enemies, but of his outside enemies, but against his own children. And over the years, they team up with each other, or they go against each other, or they team up with him against another brother, and they fight, and they tear each other apart. And they continue to ransack the Holy Roman Empire. And in the process, they slowly weaken the power of the Carolingians. They slowly weaken the power of this family, this powerful family. Okay. Now, primogeniture is going to become the law of the land in most of these cultures as Europe starts to develop. Primogeniture, because they see the problems of the past, primogeniture is going to become the big thing. So your firstborn son, not daughter, but your firstborn son is going to be the person who gets everything when you are a noble, whatever it might be. And then the other sons have to fend for themselves. And there's ways that they do that. We'll talk about that when we get to it. And then the daughters are being married off anyway. But they don't want a continuation of what happens with old poor Louis and how this really tears apart this Carolingian Empire. It's just not working out to split it up equally between everybody. Because why? Well, because they want it all, right? If you're Pepin, you look at Charles the Bald, your baby half brother, and you're like, no, he's not even my full brother. His mother was not my mother. I don't want him to have anything. I want it all. Well, there's two other brothers who have something to say about that. And so they fight each other, and they fight each other, and they fight each other. Then they make peace with the father, with Louis, and it doesn't matter. And so in the end, everything gets split apart. So we have the west, we have the central area, and then we have the east as well. Okay, so this gets split apart. Like I said, Pepin goes away. In the east, we have the kingdom of Louis the German, right, situated around these German areas as well. In the west, we have the kingdom of Charles the Bald, and then Lothar gets these areas, these former areas, especially around Rome and places like that. But over time, the empire crumbles. The Holy Roman Empire, this Carolingian Empire goes away, and it begins to slowly start to form further east. The Holy Roman Empire will continue, but not as grand and powerful as it was back in the old days, back in the first times. Okay, so the Holy Roman Empire continues, but the Carolingian Empire, as you can see, it gets split, and then eventually it starts to lose its steam and it starts to fall apart. Okay. All right. Okay, folks. Moving on really quickly. Around the end of the 8th century, so getting towards the time the coronation of Charlemagne, we start to see attacks coming from the north, the east, and the south. Okay. We'll start with the north because it's the most exciting, I think. Starting around the 8th century, the mid-700s, people started, especially along the northern coast of Europe, and especially England, start reporting attacks by these wild savages, these wild men that just literally come out of the mists, and they attack. And before you know it, everything's burning. People have been killed. Everything's been stolen. And these attackers, these savages, are gone. They're gone back into the mists. And before a real defense can be mounted against them, they're gone. They've looted. And so then all of a sudden, what happens? Maybe like the guard or something sits there and waits for them, and they don't come back for a long time. They don't come back for weeks or months at a time. But then you hear reports that further on down the coast, 50 miles down the coast, these same wild men have come and attacked them, done the same thing before they could establish a stout defense. And then these people, folks, are of course called. Get rid of these guys here. Okay. These people are called the Vikings. Okay? So, the Vikings. Where do the Vikings originate from? Well, they originate from what we now know as the Scandinavian countries, specifically Norway, a little bit from Sweden and Denmark as well. These men are not Christianized. Okay, they do not care about Christianity at all. They actually have a very bad taste when it comes to Christianity, because this is a warlike people. These people, they don't have standing armies. We won't have standing armies for a very long time, but that's what they do. They're like pirates that land and take and then go back on their ships instead of just staying on their ships. They have a disgust of Christianity. They believe that Christianity is weak. The whole idea of Christianity is, Christ's teachings: turn the other cheek, seek peace, do what you can to lead a good life. That's antithesis of the Vikings, or the Northmen, as they're called, to a certain degree. These people in Western Europe know that they come from the north. They don't know specifically where they come from. They can't look at their maps or anything like that. They know they come from the north. But these Vikings, they ransack. That's what they do. Like I said, they despise the idea of Christianity at first. They disparagingly called Christ the nailed God, as in here's a man who was so weak. He allowed himself to be nailed to this cross, to this piece of wood. It means nothing to them. And that's not what the Viking spirit's about. The Vikings believe in their old Norse gods, right? Norse for north. They believe in Odin, and they believe in Thor and Loki. They believe that these gods are warriors. Even the women gods to a certain degree are warriors as well, and that's what they do. What makes the Vikings so dangerous is because of their mobility. Okay, the Vikings don't form giant armies usually. There's not 10,000 Vikings pillaging across Europe down here. You get a guy, and he's the leader of this Viking war party, and he is their leader. He is chosen by the men. He is their leader as long as he can provide loot. As soon as he can't provide loot, then they find another leader. But as long as he keeps filling their pockets with gold and all the other stuff that they want, they will follow him. So he gathers together 40, 50 men into their small boat. This boat is a sleek attack craft. Okay, it's not meant for attacking other ships on the high seas. You can do that, but for the most part, it's about mobility. It's about getting places quick. The other thing that makes them so dangerous is that there's no hiding from these Vikings. It doesn't matter if you're all the way down here or all the way up here. It doesn't matter. They can get to you because this ship is seaworthy. You can take it out to a certain distance out on the open sea. Can't take it out too far or for months and months journeys, but you can take it out for a couple weeks. And it will last for a certain amount of time. But the other scary part is that this boat is shallow enough, sleek enough that you can take it up the river systems as well. Okay, so not only so many people are like, well, it's fine, I don't live by the sea, but it doesn't matter because the Vikings can make it to the mouth of that river, take it dozens and dozens, if not hundreds of miles up that river. All the way up. So all of a sudden you thought you were okay because you were living here in the middle of Francia, but then all of a sudden you look out there and there's 4 Viking boats, and they've come up the Seine River past Paris, and they've gone all the way up there, and you're 40 miles away from the ocean. It doesn't matter, they got to you. Okay, so it's a very brutal group of people. They don't care at all about Christianity, like I said. So when you run and hide in a church, well, they don't care. They just burn the church down around you. They're not going to waste good men fighting each one of you individually. They're just going to burn the church down, wait for you to come out and kill you then. Because they know, they're not stupid, they understand that the majority of the gold and valuable objects is not in some farmer's house. The farmer doesn't have anything. It's where? It's located in the churches. And so they know that. That's their number one prime picking. They want to go after this church, especially the bigger church, the better. Because they know that these church fathers are not going to fight against them. They're not warriors. They're not supposed to fight anyway. And they know that this church is the center where all this money is coming to. Okay, so they go after that. The first recorded attack that we know, a big attack, happens. Let me show you the picture really quick. I'll write it down. Yeah, there it is. Happens in northern England. And That happens in the year 793. So, in northern England, we have this place called Lindisfarne. Lindisfarne. And Lindisfarne in the year 793, well, there was a town there, but more importantly, there was a big monastery there, a big church. And this is in northern England up here, okay, close to the border of Scotland. And it is, let me look at my timer here. All right, hold on. Tap, tap, tap. There we go. They attack very quickly. So quickly, in fact, that the people at the point that are there, they don't even know what's going on. They roll in there very fast, and they attack, and they burn down the church. They burn down the abbey, the monastery that's there, and then they take off. Well, if you're these people that survived, what do? I mean, you can go complain to the local lord, but these people are already gone. They hit quick. Okay, this is not a standing army meant for just standing there attacking. They go light. They have armor, but most of the armor is usually leather, hardened, stitched material. They do have some chainmail. They have their shields, heavy wooden shields that they lock together usually to form a shield wall if they're fighting against an actual army. But if they're fighting against just regular people, you got two different weapons. Your main weapon, either a short stabbing sword. You're not swinging some big giant sword with two hands. You have a short stabbing sword, so you can stab over your shield just like the Romans did it hundreds of years earlier. Most Vikings also have a smaller axe, smaller axe called a sax, S-A-E-X. That's a smaller axe. And why are they carrying that? They're carrying it. It's used, obviously you can kill people with it, but if you're fighting against an adversary that has a shield, you can use that sax to pull down his shield, hook it over the top of his shield, pull it down, so the person next to you, the other Viking, can stab him and kill him. Okay, but there's no real answer to this attack from the north. There's no standing armies to march out there. You can't go invade Norway or anything like that. They just come out of the mist. They come out one day, everything's fine. The next day, they're there, and then they destroy and they pillage and they take off. And that's the hard thing, because even if they show up and you say, no, please don't destroy our city. Here's 100 pounds of gold. Well, as we see with appeasement, 1,000 years later, what do you do when you give in to a bully? When you give in to somebody? Well, is he never going to come back in? No, of course he's going to come back in, and that's what they do. They demand tribute. So, like, if you just give in to them, they will not attack you as long as you pay them tribute. Okay. So, this also helps bring down this Carolingian Empire, because they make it in force all the way up to the gates of Paris. Okay, in the late 800s. They make it all the way to the gates of Paris. They send off to the king at the time, or the king of Kingdom of Charles the Bald, and his sons. And there's no real response. The king is shown to be weak. The king is shown to be that he doesn't have the ability to protect his people. And so a local guy, a local lord, takes over and he repels these Vikings. And so what do the people do? Well, they kind of say, hey, we like you. And so we slowly see the chipping away of this empire, and slowly the formation of what will eventually be the formation of the royal family that will lead France for the next 1,000 or so years. Okay, moving on now. We'll do this one too. The Vikings, their prime target is England. Okay, England. And all the areas around. So Scotland, Wales, and then to the west, Ireland. This is prime pickings. They attack these areas over and over and over again. They attack Europe over and over again. The Vikings make it so far, because they go up the river systems, they make it all the way to the Mediterranean Sea. They make it as far as Constantinople. This is what's crazy. They make it all the way to Constantinople. So I want you to imagine that you're some Viking living up in some little village up there in Norway, and after 2 or 3 years, you've made it all the way to a place that might as well be on the other side of the moon. It's so foreign and different from your culture, to this giant city. The Vikings called Constantinople Miklegard, which means, big city, grand city. And the Eastern Romans, they did what they always do. They bought them off. They said, nah, here's some gold. You can't hope to defeat us against our walls, but we can't hope to, keep you away forever. So here's some gold. Eventually, many Vikings settled there in the Eastern Roman Empire in Constantinople, and some emperors used them as their own Praetorian Guard. They used them as their own private guys, right? Their own private bodyguard, as we saw with the Praetorians back with the Egyptians, the emperors of the Roman Empire. But for the most part, the Vikings love England. It's right there. It's the closest to their stomping grounds, and to a large degree, they take it all over. The only small kingdom that withstands them is this kingdom in the south and the west called Wessex, Wessex. But for the most part, the Vikings take over most of this. Okay? They call it the Danelaw, as in the Danes control everything here. So, but for the first time ever, this happens in the late 800s. For the first time ever, they not only bring their soldiers, right, and to take over stuff and to rape and pillage, but they start going back home and bringing who? Bringing the wives and kids, and they start settling them there. So now you have a mixture of Viking culture, and you have a mixture of the local cultures as well. Okay, what eventually defeats the Vikings, folks? What eventually defeats the Vikings? It's not any grand armies from the Carolingian Empire or anything else. You got guys that fight them and win. They're not invincible. But what eventually defeats them is the very thing that they hated. Conversion to Christianity. The slow conversion over many decades and a couple centuries slowly changes them, because they bring their wives and kids. Their wives and kids, the kids grow up and intermarry with the local populations, and they might marry. They're definitely marrying into a Christian family. Well, their kids, they either choose to become pagan like the dad or Christian like the mother. But over time, that paganism all starts to go away, and Christianity continues its slow onslaught against any pagans, any of those who believe in the old gods. And that's what, it's not some great, epic battles or wars that defeat the Vikings. It's finally this slow conversion to Christianity. And they cease to become, reavers and pirates and killers, and they slowly start to become the very people that they took over. They slowly start to become farmers and workers, and they just become normal people. But it took a long time for that to happen. And then so really quickly, and we'll wrap up with this, then we'll move on to our next video. But we see I have a picture of it, maybe. Yeah. Okay. So in the east, we see the arrival. So look, if you look up here, look at these Vikings going all the way around. It's incredible. They're attacking all this. They don't care. Like I said, look at this. They don't care if you're Christian or Jewish or Muslim. They only care if you have money. And the Muslim kingdoms down here, caliphates down here, they have money. So they're attacking them as well. The Muslims have no answer against them, just like the Christians up here have no answer against them. So they're taking that all out as well too. They make it all the way to the Mediterranean. They take the river systems through what is now Russia, all the way down to the Black Sea to Constantinople. They attack Constantinople. They don't get anywhere, but they get bought off. But nobody ever stops them. But then from the east, we also see the arrival of yet another horse confederation, horse tribe. Just like we saw with the fall of the West hundreds of years earlier, there's still hundreds of tribes coming from this giant expanse of Asia into Europe. And one of them is this group here called the Magyars, Magyars. They're coming. They are a horse people, just like their ancient ancestors, the Huns that we talked about. They pillage and they destroy. They're not Christian. They pillage and destroy all these areas like in Central Europe. So if you're the Carolingians, you're facing attacks from the north, right, from the Vikings. You're facing attacks from the east, from these Magyar warriors, and then you're facing attacks from the south, from the Muslims as well. This is hard. You're hard pressed. You know, slowly chipping away at the power of your thing. The Magyars end up finally settling in what is now modern day Hungary, and many people in Hungary can still trace their ancestry to these people. Okay, in Hungary, I believe they call them Magyars. But the English version of that is Magyars. But once again, what defeats them? Not great armies arrayed against them, but settling down in Christianity again. They become Christian. And in the south, we see still the continued attacks from the caliphates from North Africa, and the attacks by the Muslims, still trying to expand. Remember, they were stopped up here in Poitiers or Tours in 732. But they weren't gone. They were still here in modern day Spain. They even took over places like Sicily, Sardinia. They took over to a large degree southern Italy as well, getting very close to Rome. But this was a scene of continued attacks by Muslims trying to expand into Christian territory, and we're going to see that for hundreds and hundreds of years. The fight, you know, long after the Vikings are gone and the Magyars are gone, the fight between the Christian north and the Muslim south and the Muslim east. Okay, we're going to stop right there for our first video, and then we'll pick it up in the second video. Okay.